And what I can tell you is I've never been prouder of this organization, from our collaborative work with the California Highway Patrol to the men and women that work this case from the Bakersfield Police Department tirelessly. And I'm not going to mention anyone except one person by name, which is Mr. Jim Simpson. Larry Nelson and I exchanged emails and phone calls when the case was finally put together. And he asked me, he says, "Hey, Jim Simpson from the DA's office has this." And I think I told him that it's probably the most professional, most technical, and most detailed oriented district attorney that I knew, and that I was completely comfortable with putting this case in his hands. And Jim did everything that we expected of him and then some. So with that, there's not a whole lot that we can say about this. Justice has been served. I want to thank the jury for their service. This could not have been easy. Thank Judge Lua for his professionalism on the stand and for him bringing this to closure for us today. Like Lisa said, this is bittersweet. It's a little bit of closure, but it's not the end. David is in our hearts, our minds every day. And we as an organization will never forget him. And I think the sentencing happening today, 2 weeks before Peace Officers Memorial, is fitting. And we will celebrate him on the 17th out front of the organization and at the county memorial as well. And we will continue to celebrate his legacy here, because he embraced everything that we believe in at this department as serving this community. And unfortunately, he had to make that ultimate sacrifice. But the system worked. I believe in the system. And as I tell folks in the organization, trust the process. And with that, Jim and I will take any questions. Well, I'll take any questions here from the podium, but Jim is probably your biggest, the person who can talk to you most about this case, because I actually tried to stay away from it to not get involved whatsoever. So I think instead of taking questions from the podium, I'm going to turn over to Jim, and you guys, I'll give you access to Jim. But Jim, I just have to say, for men and women of the police department, thank you.
Are there any questions?
Okay. Over.
I do want to say one thing, one person I didn't mention. We both forgot. How do we forget Carla? I do have to say that Carla Pearson from Mothers Against Drunk Driving was a presence from the beginning throughout the sentencing today. And I just, again, on behalf of all of us, Carla, thank you for what you do every day on behalf of victims of crime.
Yeah, Jason.
What were some of the most difficult aspects of this case, and from a technical perspective?
Yeah, well, with any case, the challenges are often to portray the facts in a way, the facts of a situation that took place over many hours and many days and oftentimes many weeks, and condense that into a short period of time that's understandable for the men and women of the jury. And so that's a challenge that we face in every case, and it was a challenge that we faced in this case. And so certainly that was one of the things that we had to overcome, and I think that we were able to do that well.
Maybe a perception in the public that the system is slow. It's been years since the tragic event. Can you give us just kind of a snapshot of what causes it to take so long?
That's one of the things that we have to cover with families early on in this process. Is we prepare them early on, for the eventuality that this does take time, and it is a slow process, and that's tolling on many people. It's tolling on most of all the families, but also the investigative agencies. But we also have to remember that it's slow for a reason. It's slow to make sure that things are done correctly and that things are done right, and that no stone is left unturned, that the rights of the accused are respected, and that when he is ultimately convicted, we can all sleep easy knowing that he was convicted in the right way.
Did you feel increased pressure because this involved the death of a police officer, something that unfortunately doesn't happen here often, but did you feel increased pressure on you in preparing for this case because of that?
You know, I think as I've said before, because of the nature of the case, because of the nature of the victim, there were elements of it that were closer to home. But I approach this case with the same thoroughness and professionalism that I do all of my cases. And I felt the same pressure on this case that I do all cases where life is lost. And I think that answers your question.
Just for the benefit of the live viewing audience now, what is the sentence, Mr. Melendez?
Sure. So ultimately, he will be sentenced to 31 years to life. And what that means is that he will serve 31 years before becoming eligible for parole.
Do you think that you should be eligible for parole in 31 years?
That's not for me to decide. And part of the reason that's a question that can't really be answered at this point is because that determination will be made by a parole board, and they will take into consideration not only the facts and circumstances of this case, but how he performed during that time period.
And I know some of the other time that we heard was in regards to probation. Can you maybe elaborate a little on that? If he's doing 31 to life, at what point will he be making probation?
Sure. So one of the distinctions that I think you have to make is between the difference between probation and parole, and those are different things. So you heard during the course of the sentence that probation was denied, and that was because in sentencing, oftentimes the court may have discretion to impose simply probation in lieu of a jail sentence. And so when you heard that probation was denied, that was an indication that he was going to be sentenced to a jail sentence, a prison term. And so probation was denied. Now parole is what he may be eligible for after he has served the base term.
How much of that sentence was wrapped up in the events of that night versus his own criminal past?
All except 1 year.
All except 1 year was connected to the events of that night.
Certainly, yeah. He, I mean, it's when you talk about how much of that sentence was wrapped up. I'm not talking about the things that went into the judge's decision, circumstances, and aggravation, those in mitigation, but the actual numbers themselves. He received a 1 year sentence for his prior prison term. The remainder were for the events of that night.
And how much discretion did the judge have with a case like this? So was this more or less the letter of the law?
It was more or less the letter of the law. Yeah.
Did his comments during the confession regarding hatred of police officers, did that play a role at all in this, or was that just something that was to the side?
It was more or less to the side. That evidence came out at trial, and it was something that the jury was allowed to consider. But the real meat of this case, I've always felt, was the degree of recklessness that he engaged in, the chain of events that he set in motion from the very beginning of that night, preparing the shotgun, preparing the car, engaging the officer in a pursuit that was extraordinarily dangerous and resulted in the loss of life.
And what he had planned for that night? Gun, remove the plates?
One can only imagine.
All right. Well, thank you very much for coming. That'll conclude today's press conference. For the media, if there would like to be any one-on-ones, we can certainly arrange that for here on the side. But as far as for the press conference as a whole, we'll go ahead and conclude it. Thank you very much for showing up today.